Good evening, everyone. This is the December 22nd, 2021 meeting of the Municipal Land Use Board of the Borough of River Edge. The time now is 7:30 p.m. This meeting of the Municipal Land Use Board of the Borough of River Edge is being held remotely and recorded via Zoom due to the COVID-19 pandemic and is in compliance with the provisions of Executive Orders 103 and 104, the Open Public Meetings Act, and associated regulations. Notice of this meeting was published in the Bergen Record on January 20th, 2021, and the Ridgewood News on January 22nd, 2021, posted on the front doors of Borough Hall and posted on the borough's website. The notice included the dial-in and login information necessary for public participation and access to this meeting remotely. A copy of the agenda for this meeting was made available on the borough's website near the posting of the meeting notice and included the dial-in and login information. During the public comment period of this meeting, if you would like to make a public comment, please press the raise hand button on Zoom or dial *9 on your telephone keypad to raise your hand. The board will address you by name or by the last 4 digits of your telephone number. You may mute and unmute yourself by pressing the microphone icon on Zoom or dialing *6 on your telephone keypad. You must state your name and address prior to making a public comment. Members of the public were permitted to submit written comments prior to the meeting via mail or email, which will be read during the public comment period. Okay. Sabrina, would you call roll?
All right, Mr. Mayor,
Here.
Mr. Caslin,
Here.
Ms. Boland. See that she just came on,
She's muted.
but she's muted. Mr. Merman.
Here.
Mr. Grasso is excused. Mr. Cray.
Here.
Mr. Arkelian.
I'm here.
Councilman Kinigo.
Here.
Mr. Gibbons.
Here.
Mr. Pfeffer.
Here.
Mr. Esposito.
Here.
Okay, and also here are Mr. Behrens and Mr. Costa and myself, Rena Steinley.
Thank you very much. We do have one change on the agenda this evening for the application for Hernan Green, 199 Bogart Road, Block 1207, Lot 30. That application will not be heard this evening. It will be scheduled for a later meeting. I don't think we have a date yet scheduled for that, correct?
I think Ed had one.
Yeah, February 9th is the next available date. Although I will tell you, we have Perkins on that night, which is a D variance. So I don't know, if not February 9th, then it has to be February 23rd.
Okay, at a later date to be determined, but one of those
Okay.
dates. Okay. So if I don't know if we have anybody in the public, but if you are here for that application this evening, that will not be heard by the board.
I do see Mr. Cook is labeled as with the green application. I don't know if you need to.
Thank you. I guess just one question is some insight into the process going forward that this continues to get pushed out, as we are probably the only recipient of detrimental effects of the construction of these walls, with no permits or variance from a.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cook, are you part with the applicant? That's what I was asking.
No. I am a
Okay.
resident that was alerted. So I just, if I can just ask a question about process going forward with this being pushed out another, call it six to so weeks at this point, what the expectations are beyond not being heard tonight.
Well, we're permitting the applicant to carry the application to a later meeting date, so then they can address all the concerns that were raised by the borough engineer that were received today. And so there'll be a notice for the meeting as of today for the application will be heard on February 9th. And if it is changed again, we will provide notice.
Okay. Thank you all and have a great holiday and New Year.
Thank you. You too, Mr. Cook.
Okay. Looks like there's someone else on here for the green application as well that just came on. Not sure.
He's still getting set up there.
Yeah, it looks like they're, Mr. Manchala.
Says connecting to audio, so I think he's still getting connected here.
Yeah. Mr. Manchala, can you hear us?
Marina, we should probably get their names and addresses too if they speak, so we know where they're located and what can maybe do a drive-by and check out what's going on their site as well.
Okay, we can try and do that, but since nothing is being heard on the application tonight, so they'll have to come back at the rescheduled meeting if they have concerns or submit questions to the clerk.
But just so you know, I have the previous speaker's name and address and phone number and email.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. All right, why don't we keep going and see if we can address Mr.
Yeah, maybe we can
Manchala
do
when he
the minutes.
gets connected. So the first item on the agenda then this evening will be the approval of the minutes from our December 8th, 2021 meeting. Drafts of the minutes were circulated previously. Open the floor to comments on the draft of the board.
Mr. Chairman, Dick
Mr.
Merman
Merman.
here. I have a minor typo. I think that we should correct because it doesn't read proper. Under new business, the last paragraph, it says, starts with Councilman Chinigo brought up the front porches and looking at the process that requires approval from the board, or the next word says lighter approval. I think lighter should read higher approval. That's it. Did I lose you?
Okay,
So it should say higher instead of lighter.
Yes, I think it's basically a typo, but
Okay.
it reads properly now. It should.
okay.
Okay,
Any other comments from the board? Okay, there being none, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes with the modification from Mr. Merman.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr.
Second.
Gibbons. Thank you, Mr. Merman. Marina, do you
That's
want to
it.
call a roll, or we just do a voice?
we can do a voice vote, but Mr. Grasso, Mr. Kelly, and Mr. Esposito were not present at the meeting and they cannot vote on the minutes.
Okay, so with that in mind, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstained? Mr. Esposito,
The abstention, yep.
Mr. Karakalian, and
And, oh, Mr. Grasso isn't here.
Grasso. Okay. Thank you, everyone. The next item on the agenda this evening is the memorialization of our resolution for our meeting schedule for the coming year, 2022. Draft of this was circulated. Open it to the board for comments, questions. Okay, there being none, I'll take a motion to approve this resolution as it stands.
So moved, Mike Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Cray. Can I have a
Second, Merman.
Thank you, Mr. Merman. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstain? There being none, resolution's approved. Thank you. Moving along, as we said before, for those who may have joined since the meeting began, the application for Hernan Green, 199 Bogard Road, will not be heard this evening. It has been rescheduled to either February 9th or February 23rd. So if you're in attendance expecting to hear that for that application, it will not be heard this evening by the board. The next item on our agenda this evening is old business. This is Elena Chimakova and Volodymyr Volkanov. This is 322 Van Saun Court, Block 1107, Lot 34. Looking for approval for the installation of a patio and pool. This application was carried from our November 10th, 2021 meeting. I believe the applicant and council are in attendance this evening. Good evening, Mr. Barrett.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We left off with Mr. Costa being tasked with the unenviable job of reviewing the site and the complaints that the neighbors had made regarding drainage. And I believe Mr. Costa is with us, and perhaps it would now be appropriate for him to detail his findings to the board.
I'm sorry, could I, just to interrupt briefly, at the November 10th meeting, we didn't get a full recording of the application. So if Mr. Barrett, could you just briefly provide a summary of the application just for the record?
Yes.
So we can, yeah.
Just as Ms. Dinley requested a brief summary, I began that meeting with the fact that my clients had signed a purchase contract at the end of February of this year for the premises. Closing was scheduled for the end of April or the beginning of May. In mid-April, my client was advised that the kitchen was back ordered, and eventually they were forced to change the kitchen. They weren't able to obtain the one that they wanted. Sometime in June, the builder applied for a certificate of occupancy and was advised of the fact that the impervious coverage exceeded the permitted amount. He then substantially reduced the size of the driveway, but was still 3.4% over the maximum permitted by ordinance. My client's lease was in the process of expiring, and they and their children had no place to reside, so they agreed to take responsibility upon themselves to apply for a variance so that they could move into the home under a temporary certificate of occupancy. The variance that they were going to apply for would be to permit the patio as constructed, which exceeded the ordinance by 3.34% to remain. They sent a letter on July 16th to the borough, accepting the responsibility to apply for the variance, and they closed title at the beginning of April. They first applied for a variance for the existing coverage, but also to install a pool and surrounding walkway, which would have brought the coverage up to 44.7%. Subsequent to applying, they had the opportunity to review the videos of several hearings where the board emphatically stated that the maximum variance they would consider would be no more than 40% coverage. As a result, they instructed their engineer to revise their plans to reduce the width of the walkway from the driveway to the backyard and to eliminate the walkway around the pool, resulting in coverage of 39.9%, or an increase over approximately 1.56% over what currently exists. It would be an increase of approximately 170 square feet. The applicant testified similarly to what I just summarized. We also had our engineer testify as to the steps he had taken to attempt to bring this to as close to conformity as possible, taking into account that we started out at the 38.34%. The neighbors, several neighbors testified of a drainage condition in the rear yard of one of the neighbors. And at that point, it was the board discussed, and as I stated before, asked Mr. Costa to go to the site and to address the issue with the neighbors. And it's my understanding that he did so.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Costa, if you would provide us with
Chairman, good
your
evening, members
review
of
and
the
your
board.
findings.
That is 1,000% correct. Actually, the board, I guess, tasked me to meet with all the neighbors, which I did. It was the adjacent neighbor, literally all the neighbors around the property except to the left and to the right. By doing so, and I'm not sure if any of the neighbors are on here tonight. I don't see anybody on the screen. I don't know if they're on or not. But we walked the entire site. Obviously, the owner was there. Mr. Barrett, you were not there. Your engineer wasn't there. But at the end of the discussion, it was agreed upon to put in a cutoff drain around the perimeter of the property and then direct the stormwater towards the street to a pop-up. All I can tell you is Mr. Osterkorn is on the lower right-hand side. He's the engineer. My office sent him a detail of a cutoff drain. He prepared the plan. He put that drain in detail on his plan. The only thing that he did, which I think at this point shouldn't be approved, is that there's a direct connection through the curb onto the street. What I suggested was a pop-up. This way it'll be further back on their yard, just in case there's going to be any groundwater. And in the event there's groundwater, and again, if this is approved, Marina, I think this is definitely has to go into the resolution.
Okay.
That in the event there is groundwater and this thing continues to flow, then it needs to get hooked up into the municipal system. They would need a license agreement from the mayor and council, not to impact any of the homeowners on that court. That would be my only suggestion. And I believe all of that was agreed to with the various neighbors. Again, I thought we would have the opportunity to show them this plan, to go over it again. But again, the plan came in sometime on Monday afternoon to me. But again, if they're present tonight on the screen, they can certainly ask questions. I'm sure Mr. Osterkorn, Mr. Barrett could answer any of them, but basically that's the idea is to cut any water off that's coming off this property, capture it, store it, and then redirect it to the front of the house towards the street to the municipal system and away from the neighbors.
Thank you, Mr. Costa.
You're welcome, Chairman.
Mr. Osterkorn? You're muted.
Muted. And just for the record, Mr. Osterkorn and Ms. Chomakova were duly sworn and qualified to testify at the last meeting, and they're still under oath today.
You're still muted, Mr. Osterkorn.
All right.
Here we go.
Okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, I listened to what Mr. Costa said, and you know, he had a meeting, and it's a good idea, and I think that should resolve the issue. What we're planning is to construct about 250 feet of curtain drain, 2 feet by 3 feet deep, with stone around it, with a 6-inch PVC. Per the detail that we have from the town, and we're directing it out towards Van Saun Court with a pop-up drain. I had a lower drain installed, but we can certainly eliminate that and just have the pop-up drain. And you have about 4 feet of pitch from the highest corner out towards Van Saun, so there should be plenty of pitch for the water to be gathered and discharged. So it will eliminate any groundwater from the site in question, or any runoff from the site in question going on to the neighbors.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Barrett, is your client going to make any statement this evening before I open up to the board for questions?
I don't think at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very good. At this point, I'd like to open it up to questions from the board. Let's start with Mr. Excuse me, Mr. Pfeffer.
Thank you. The only thing I'm curious about is, Mr. Costa, you said that you spoke to all the neighbors around the house, except for the ones to the left or the right. Did those neighbors have any communication with you at any time, like emails or any way to get a sense of what their position is on this issue?
Nothing. Basically, I met with Mary Baker in the morning, and then Mary, I I guess, put the entire schedule together with the neighbors. But apparently those neighbors didn't have problems, which quite frankly, the one to the left, I thought originally had the problems when the house was built. Because the original builder never contacted us, installed seepage pits, and then actually had an overflow literally pointing directly at the house as you're looking at it from the street to the left. But apparently those people had no concerns. They never showed up and they never contacted our office. It was literally Marion, and if you went in a clockwise pattern, literally around the perimeter of the backyard of the house. So there was 1, 2, 3, 4. There was probably 6 of us that morning, and then obviously the owner of the property in question. But again, I think this solved the problems. I don't want to put obviously words in people's mouths, and it seemed at the end of the day, it seemed like all the neighbors got along. So I thought when I left, it was a good thing. And during construction, if it is approved, we'll make sure it's implemented correctly. And if there is any changes in the conditions out there that are unforeseen, that's why I said to Marina, put in a caveat that they would have to do some additional work in order to make this work and not impact any of the people behind them. But again, it's up to the board. I personally think it's going to work. I've done this type of drains before in different places, and I don't foresee a problem here. Will it correct the problem that, in my personal opinion, exists in those backyards? No, but it's not going to make it worse, and hopefully will make it slightly better.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pfeffer. Ms. Boland?
No, my only comment is just from the summary. The homeowner, it was flagged at the time of purchase. So they were aware when they purchased it that there was an issue. So they weren't really starting from the 38. That was never approved by the borough or anyone. It was really from 35. And now they're coming in for 39. Is that correct, my understanding?
Yes, Ms. Boland, that is correct.
Okay. All right, that was it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Boland. Mr. Esposito?
I'm okay.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Cray?
Yeah, I want to revisit a question from the last meeting, and just to kind of frame it. This is an oversized lot. It's almost 11,000 square feet. On its regular sized lot, 7,500 feet, 35% coverage is like 2,600 and change as far as square footage. At 35% for the lot we're talking about, that's 3,700, almost 3,800 square feet. It's 43% more coverage already than on a standard lot. And I'd asked at the last meeting and said I really would like to hear some real foundation for this. What's the justification for the request for variance? A public good or a hardship? And we never really got anything definitive on that. So I'd like to hear thoughts on that.
Barrett?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think that perhaps the easiest way to address this, there was a case decided back in 2011, Josephine Lang versus the Board of Adjustment of the Borough of North Caldwell. And it was a situation where the applicant had an above ground pool that existed and wanted to install an in-ground pool. And the board granted the variance and the court upheld it. The appellate division upheld it, stating that the variance was warranted on ground that replacing the above ground pool would advance safety and the aesthetic purposes of zoning. That is one of the tenets of the municipal land use law, that if you can advance zoning considerations, that is grounds for variance. In the Borough of River Edge, one is permitted an above ground pool, and that does not count toward the impervious coverage. So we have a situation where this applicant could go, put up an above ground pool, same dimensions as they are currently proposing, and then perhaps turn around and apply to the board. And under the Lang case, the board has justification in approving that. And I think you have to look at a couple of the purposes of the land use law. But primarily, it provides that the purpose of the law is to provide sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of agricultural, residential, recreational, commercial, and industrial uses and open space, both public and private, according to the respective environmental requirements in order to meet the needs of all New Jersey residents. Now, to say that this lot is larger than most in the borough is absolutely correct. However, 35% is 35%. It's the same impact on a lot, regardless of the size. If it's a 5,000 square foot lot and you cover 35% of it, that leaves 65% open. If you permit 40%, you're leaving 60% open. There's no difference in this lot. It accommodates a larger home because it's a larger lot. This board has, over the past year, granted 5 or 6 coverage variances, but repeatedly stated that they would not exceed the 40%. My client could have come in at 44%, never would have been approved. We recognize that. And in an attempt to conform to what the board's holdings had been over the last few months, reduced it in size so that all that is proposed is a swimming pool. Once the issue with the neighbors came up, which was the first time they heard about it, no one had approached them and indicated that there was any problem with the existing site. They immediately embraced the idea of Mr. Costa meeting with the neighbors and devising a solution. He gave the solution to Mr. Osterkorn, who drew it on the plan, and they're willing to abide by that. And I just wanted to clarify one thing, though, with what Mr. Costa said. Mr. Costa, you addressed the current conditions on the property, on the neighboring properties. Were those conditions caused by this house, in your opinion, or did they exist for other reasons?
No, they were caused by the, again, prior to the ownership of your client. But it was.
That was the
But that was corrected. That was corrected, and then I can't think of the builder's name off the top of my head. Prior to him getting a CO, he installed the drainage systems that are currently on site today.
Right,
And
but
then
you
ultimately
spoke,
got a CO and ultimately sold the house to your clients.
right, but you spoke about conditions on the neighbors to the rear, the condition of their property.
We walked on both properties. We walked around the block. We were on both properties. Yes.
Correct, but you stated that it may not correct the conditions which exist on those properties to the rear.
Correct.
What are those conditions?
Again, you have, it's apparent you have a high groundwater table. You have roots that are very, very close to the surface. There's no question there's ponding in the backyard in that low point there. The adjacent neighbor put a curb up, so there's almost like a damming effect there. And again, so a lot of, and again, once again, we've had storms recently that are monumental, to say the least. So again, this situation is going to happen every time it rains, but the fear is that once this pool goes in, it would make those matters even worse. Based on the design that's in front of the board tonight, it is not going to make it worse. If anything, it'll help that situation and definitely not make it any worse. That's all.
Thank you.
And again, just one other thing, being on that site, being in the court, even though the lot is oversized, it's a pie. So it's narrow in the front, it pies obviously very wide in the back. And it's not as useful as one would think for an 11,000 square foot lot. There's not that much recreational space between the backyard and the house. It's just not that deep at that point. So there's not a lot of room to maneuver. Obviously, to the left and right, it's very wide, but depth-wise, it really isn't. And again, it's because of the, it's not a cul-de-sac, obviously it's the court, but that's why.
So, but in response to you, Mr. Gray, so once again, there are improvements that are proposed, which will benefit the neighborhood. And that's one of the criteria is will the grant of the variance result in detriment? And in this case, it would not, because we're getting the additional drainage. It's a betterment for the community.
I want to understand something you said earlier. You talked about a prior court case where an existing above ground pool was going to be replaced with an in-ground pool.
Correct.
Right, and so your position is that then if anybody builds an above ground pool or threatens to build an above ground pool, we have to automatically approve it because they could build an above ground pool with no need for authorization from this board, and then would come in and say, I'm going to replace it with an in-ground pool, and that precedent would.
No, what I was saying was you were looking for reliance on the law as to how the board could grant an approval. And I pointed out to you that the court upheld a variance that was granted for that purpose on the grounds that it would advance safety and aesthetic purposes of zoning.
But there's no ground pool. There's no above ground pool here. I mean,
I understand that, but we have drainage improvements that are going to be made, which would advance the safety purposes of zoning.
Okay, that's an argument you can make, but the imaginary above ground pool, I think is it's not a good argument, not a good foundation. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cray. Mr. Arkelian.
A lot of great questions, a lot of great answers, and my questions have been answered. The only question I did have procedurally, I know the upgraded plans came in, I believe, on Monday. Is there a time factor with that, Marina, or?
No, they were posted on the website and distributed to the board and presented tonight, so they're all right.
Okay, I'm good then. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
So I have similar concerns to Mr. Cray. I think, Mr. Barrett, you're saying that the public good is found in the additional drainage. That's the argument you're making. Is that correct, Mr. Barrett?
In part, Mayor, yes.
Is there another part?
Well, again, that the purposes of zoning is to permit recreational uses in an appropriate location. This is an appropriate location.
But we're granting greater than 35%. And so we're considering what public good is being put forth that would give us the ability to justify greater than 35%. So the second question is there any hardship? Because I don't see any hardship. I think.
No, under the law, there's no hardship, nor was there any hardship in any of the cases the board heard this year with the same issue.
Well, Ms. Dinley can clarify whether I'm incorrect on this, but each case is heard separately, is it not, Mr. Barrett?
Yes, it is, Mr. Mayor. But
okay.
If you
but
perhaps then the board would owe this applicant an explanation as to why they're different than everybody else who the board heard this year.
So many of the cases it was an undersized lot, and that does matter, but these are individual cases. Mr. Barrett, just for the record, the improved lot coverage that the applicant is asking for with the new designs that were sent on Monday is what?
The 39.9, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, it is 39.9. No further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Councilman.
I guess just not so much a question, a comment. I agree with everything the mayor and Mr. Cray said and the spirit behind what they said. Other than that, thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Gibbons.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. First, to go back to the reason, I guess that they want this to be granted, the drainage that will go in because of the pool. Just want on record that that drainage can be done without a pool. Right? You know, we don't need to put the pool in to do the drainage that would help the neighbors. Just not asking you to, you know, just as a comment there. And another comment, just, you know, yes, we have been inclined to allow for 40%, but that isn't the new rule. And, you know, I don't want it to be known that, you know, anyone who comes in here that asks for 40% is just going to get, you know, peeled off. You know, as the mayor said, everyone we meet with is, you know, looked at separately. Every instance is different. Every lot is different. Every situation is different. And we just have to keep in mind that we are also talking about a patio here that is oversized. Does anyone know what the actual size of the patio is that's currently on the site? I don't see any.
Actually, I did take a look, figuring that might come up. So if I could throw out some numbers. So the 4.9% that they're over by, that's the increase above the 35% to 39.9% is 527 square feet that they're over by. The patio itself, including the paver landing and the one step, is an area approximately 20 feet by 28 feet. That's a total of 560 feet. And the body of the pool measuring 12 by 25 is 306 square feet.
Okay, so the patio is 20 by 28, because on the map, it looks like it's a pretty good sized patio. So we're talking about allowing a very large patio, in my estimation, and a pretty good sized pool, you know, on an oversized lot. You know, so I don't think these are, you know, gimmies. I don't think these are easy to just say yes to. You know, I'm still deciding where I'm standing on this, but I just want to put it out there that we are talking about a large patio, a large pool on an oversized lot, and a lot of the properties that have come in have been on 60 by 100 lots or 50 by 100 lots, not 11,000 square feet. So I don't really have any questions. I wanted to clarify the size of the patio, you know, and everything. So there's going to be nothing around this pool, correct? So the pool will just be the pool and grass right at the end of the pool, besides any coping or whatever has to be on there. That's correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I think that's it for now.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Mr. Merman.
Yes, I have a clarification, a question, and a concern. And the first two are from Mr. Costa, basically. It's my understanding, Mr. Costa, you're proposing that the pop-up device remain, but the piping from that pop-up be removed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's my question, because Mr. Osterkorn's testimony left me a little confused there. My question is, we have two sets of existing chambers. And we both know that those chambers have a pit, a stone-filled pit below them. My question is that 3 feet depth of your French drain detail going to be sufficient to cut off the water horizontally from the pit? In other words, what is the bottom of the pit such that water coming out of the bottom of the pit can pass below that 3 foot depth of the French drain?
Basically, the neighbors were complaining that the surface runoff,
Okay.
not below, but coming off of the surface of this lot was impacting them. Now,
Okay.
just for the record, their houses had no stormwater management. Their gutters spilled into their backyard and spilled into this low area. And again, the neighbor, and I apologize, I don't remember her name. She actually put a concrete curb. So it even created a dam, like a damming effect in that lower portion where all these lots converge. So the idea was to put the surface, basically make it decorative with river stone on top. Any surface water coming off the grass goes into this perforated pipe, redirected towards the street.
Okay,
Stops
So-
before the street, just in case it is gonna pick up groundwater. And that's
Right.
what I said, a caveat. If you guys are gonna approve it, if this doesn't work, because we don't want an icing situation where this thing is constantly running, and then it's going over the sidewalks onto the roadway, and now we got a nuisance, that it would have to be redirected at some point to the municipal system. And then we've done that in the past in this area. I think it was on Taft, if I'm not mistaken. That the borough issued a license agreement to that builder. He has 4 sump pumps when he built that house, and the water was constantly running, creating a public nuisance down there. So very similar. The 2 blocks almost look identical, and basically here we are.
all right, so, right now, you're telling me that you're only capturing the surface water with your French drain detail.
Right,
Um,
there's 5 pits, there's 5 740s, infiltrated 740s,
It's
Which
a
is
lot of
probably-
water, yeah.
which is about 2,500, probably around 2,500 gallons or
I-
better.
I will remind you, we put a curtain drain in a similar situation on the Lafayette property to prevent a similar situation for the house below on Lee Avenue. And that was, Mr. Costa, that was probably 5 or 8 years ago.
That was a while ago, correct?
Yeah, that was, so that's why I bring up my concern, but nevertheless, would it behoove us to, along those, opposite those chambers, to put a deeper curtain drain? So that, hopefully to relieve a little bit of the water coming out of the pits from going to the adjacent property?
I don't believe those pits are impacting the adjacent properties.
Okay,
I really,
Alright.
I don't.
okay.
Again, I
That-
listened to you know what, I had a professor in school. He says the best advice is to take the advice from the people that live in the area, because they know more, because they lived there for a long amount of time, than what you could see with your eyes. And again, listening to all of them and then looking at what we saw that day, I personally think this will work. And again, I don't know if the neighbors are on tonight, but certainly if it's not going to work, they'll be very vocal. That's why I want a caveat built into the resolution if
Okay.
this is approved.
All right, you answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Now-
Chairman.
My concern is this, and I want to see if we can address it somehow, and I don't know the answer. If this is approved, this application, the way we're going, what is to prevent what I label creep? And creep is somewhere down the line, time-wise, and I'm not pointing fingers at this owner, could be another owner, comes along and adds the patio around the pool or walkway around the pool, puts in a shed or 2 or what? What do we have to prevent this creep of additional impervious possibilities? Can we put something into the resolution? Can we bind the property somehow? Marina, maybe this is something you can answer, or even Mr. Barrett. I can foresee somewhere, sometime, whether it's soon or a little bit later on, that there's going to be other impervious amenities installed in this rear yard. And I would like to protect the borough. And I would like the borough somehow to be able to go in and inspect that and make sure that that hasn't occurred, or some practical remedy. And now I'm gonna let Marina and Mr. Barrett try to answer that.
Well, in our resolutions, we always include standard language that says that if things are are constructed outside of the scope of the resolution, then the applicant has to come back before the board. And when the applicant puts in for the soil movement permit, the borough is going to be involved in inspecting that with any soil and construction project in the borough. So that's another safeguard that we put in our resolutions. Otherwise, it's up to the zoning officer to find violations or get complaints from neighbors, and that seems to have been effective in this situation.
Mr. Barrett, you got anything?
Mr. Merman, all I can respond is that anyone can put in an improvement without securing the necessary approvals. And similar to what, anytime the board grants a variance, as Ms. Stinley says, there is a provision that if you go beyond what is permitted, you have to come back to the board, or as she points out, the zoning officer would have to find a deviation from the plans, or in this case, and again, as she pointed out, the neighbors are very vigilant because they have had problems down there. We know that. The southern end of town has always had certain water issues. So anything that's done that's going to create a further problem for them, the town is going to hear about. You can only go on the good faith of people that they're not going to do something without the necessary approvals.
Yeah, but there's also people on the other side of that coin.
Oh, there absolutely are. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
That's what the world is made of.
Okay, so from what I'm hearing right now, our best control device are the two neighbors next door. So either Mr. Costa or Mr. Barron's, or both of you, I'm suggesting that the neighbors, that you notify the neighbors, whether you do it verbally or written, whatever, to be on the lookout for problems, installation problems of additional water coming down. Okay, I think that
we do have members of the public in attendance, so they might be able to comment at the public comment period as well.
Okay. All right. Mr. Chairman, that's the extent of my comments at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Merman. I have no questions at this time as well, so I will entertain a motion to open to the public at this time.
So moved. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Cray. May I have a second?
Merman.
Thank you, Mr. Merman. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstain? Okay, at this time, we're now open for public comment. Marina?
Yep, I do have an individual. All right, it looks MJB. I believe that's Ms. Baker. So if you just unmute yourself, you'll be able to speak. Please state your name for the record, spell your last name, and provide your address, please.
Mary J. Baker, 264 Valley Road. My neighbors couldn't be here tonight because we didn't want to be together because of the COVID problem. I liked Mr. Merman's wording on the creeping. We were concerned about that. We don't want to see any of that. We were happy with what Mr. Costa came up with. And, we have no objections to the pool. And if it does cause a problem and there's that caveat in there, we'd be very happy with this. We've been in this neighborhood for 100 years, all of us put together. So we're well aware of the water. And we are very, very, we're going to be watching that no sheds, pool, walkway goes around the pool or anything. I can't imagine having a pool with just grass up to it, but if that's what they're going to do to get it, then that's fine, but it's got to stay that way. And the other thing I want to mention was the neighbors to the right, they're non-English speaking and they don't communicate with anybody. So that's why I don't think they were there. And as far as the pipe that Mr. Costa was talking about, that where the house ran from the house to the sewer drain, that's on Van Zorn Court, 2 houses from the house that they're building, and they had to pay for that. And that runs all the time, the water to that. So that's where that is. Right. But we will be watching because that is a big concern of ours.
See, Mary, that's how I know I'm getting old. I thought it was Taft. This is.
Yeah, no, it's Van Zorn. It's just.
I
one
gotta
of
start writing
2
everything.
houses.
Now, you said 100 years you lived there. 100 years? I didn't know.
Well,
You
with all the
celebrated your
neighbors.
16th birthday last week when I ran into you. Stop it
Exactly,
now.
exactly. No, but with all the neighbors have been here for many, many years. We're well aware of the water, and Mr. Costa understood and, was very patient with us. But that's why the neighbors aren't here tonight, because they can't Zoom and we don't want to be together.
Right. We appreciate your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you have anybody else, Marina?
There's one phone call-in listener. So if you're interested in speaking, you can press *9. Maybe they're just listening in.
They may just be listening. Okay, very good. All right.
Okay.
Okay, that's the roster. Then I'll take a motion then for us to close the public session at this time.
So moved. Gibbons.
Thank you. Mr. Gibbons, Mr. Arakelian, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstain? All right, at this time, we're now closed to the public session. All right, at this time, I will entertain a motion on the application from the board.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
For the engineer, what are the square footage of the walkway to the rear yard? Because that's been one option of not really requiring a walkway to the rear yard.
Excuse me.
It was removed.
I think it's about 70 square feet,
70 square
Mrs.
feet.
Bowling, approximately. It's about 1.5 feet wide by about.
Well,
50
actually,
feet
it's 130 square feet. Has to be
130
removed.
square.
Okay.
Well, that's what's being removed.
Right.
It's 130. So I think the question, Mr. Osterkorn, was how much is remaining?
Yeah, I think Tom is correct. Then it's about 70 square feet.
Okay.
So it's approximately a third of what was there, what's currently there.
That's correct.
Any further questions? Comments?
Could I get Mr. Behrens to just go over the basics about the public good test, just for the record and for clarification?
Sure. So as the board knows, there are 2 ways that zoning boards or land use boards can approve a C variance, which this is in this case for the improved lot coverage that is at 39.9%, where a maximum of 35% is permitted. And the test that applies here is what's known as the C2 public benefits test, for which an applicant has to demonstrate that the public goods of granting the variance relief outweigh any detriments to the public. And in addition, they have to address the negative criteria, which is that there are no substantial detriments to the public and no substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the master plan or zoning ordinance. We've heard, some testimony in that regard.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question.
Any further comments or questions from the board? Okay. Again, I will entertain a motion on the application at this time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
let me offer a start and we can build on that. How's that?
That would be great.
Okay. So on the application that we're discussing, the 322 Van Zorn Court, block 1107, lot 34. And I apologize ahead of time for mispronouncing the last names. Chunkanava and Volkanov. And again, I know that's not correct, but engineers are poor English people. All right, I make a motion that the board grant the variance, which I believe there was only one for maximum lot coverage. And that is based on the revised plan submitted by Mr. Astacorn of Astacorn Engineering Associates. Is a 2-page plan. One shows revised layout with a curtain drain and a proposed pop-up relief drain. And there's a second sheet that shows the French drain detail. This having been reviewed and recommended by our engineering firm, Mr. Costa, of Costa Engineering. And that the overflow pipe from the pop-up relief drain to Van Zorn Court not be installed and removed from a corrected drawing. Furthermore, that it's noted if water continues to bothersome the downhill people, the borough be notified. And likewise, if the pop-up relief drain discharges a sufficient amount of water to become a nuisance and or a safety hazard, that the applicant agrees to enter into a agreement with the borough to install an off-site continuation of the pipe to an off-site borough facility. And go ahead, boys, chew on it.
Mr. Chairman, I have a quick question.
Mr. R. Kelly?
All right, so we're predicating this on if the pop-up doesn't work and they have to enter a licensing agreement with the borough. What happens if the borough council refuses the license application? Marina?
So if the borough council, if it gets to that point, then the applicant will be back before this board. Or submit or some sort of revised plans to the borough engineer for review. I just wanted to summarize Mr. Merman's motion and just see if the summary is accurate. That the motion is that the board grant the variance for 39.9% maximum improved lot coverage based on the revised plans, including a curtain drain and pop-up. The overflow pipe will be removed and a corrected drawing will be submitted to the board. If drainage problems persist, the applicant agrees to a borough engineer review and recommendations, including but not limited to seeking municipal connection if necessary.
All right, so I'm gonna go back to my question. Because let's say the applicant puts the pool in, puts the drainage in, doesn't work. They say, hey, you know what, let's go back to the borough council and get the licensing agreement. The council looks at it and says, this is not something we're comfortable with. We're gonna make them rip out the pool. This is with that caveat in there, there is possibility that the mayor and council may not approve the licensing agreement. It may be prudent for the applicant to go ahead with the licensing agreement to the borough council as a contingency plan, get that approval before they start, either before they start or before we approve this. Because we can't speak, we have one council member and a mayor here. We can't speak for the other 5 council people. and see if that licensing agreement is going to be approved or not.
I'm not sure if that would be necessary at this point because as with all of our resolutions, they're conditioned on any additional approvals, such as seeking approval from a county board.
But this is a little different because we won't know if Mr. Costa's fix is going to work until they put the pool in. I'm just playing the devil's advocate because I don't want to see the applicant do all this work, have to come back, and now we have a problem unless Mr. Costa has a.
No, let me just clarify. Yeah, just clarity for the record. The only reason they would connect to the municipal system isn't to bypass or stop any flow going to the neighbors. It's if it becomes a public nuisance.
Right.
Where there's flow coming out of the pop-up constantly. Wintertime, icing condition on the sidewalk, the street. Summertime, constant water in the street. We're all residents of River Edge. You go down some of the roads in the wintertime, the sump pumps are going off and you could have figure skating in some of the streets here and obviously the salting. That's what we don't want to happen. It's not going to change the design. It's not going to stop the cutoff. It's not going to affect the neighbors. It's if it becomes a public nuisance in the street and the sidewalk and those neighbors along that, and not have an additional chore for the DPW to put more salt to stop an icing situation in the winter. That's the only reason it's for.
All right, so Marina and Bob, if you're good with it, I'm good with it. I wanted just to throw that question out there because we're predicating it.
Understood. And again, in the past, the borough has done this, so you wouldn't be a pioneer. There's other situations where these exist in town, where we allow people to tie in. There's actually an agreement. In the event that this backs up and causes harm, the town is held harmless. We've done it in a couple other situations and it's working out fine. And again, I misspoke before. I guess it is the house diagonally across the street from this house where they built years ago and literally they had 4 sump pumps pumping water nonstop constantly and created a situation down there. And that was remedied many years ago. And I haven't had another phone call since, so I'm sure it's still working fine.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think back to, excuse me, Mr. Merman's motion on the table. Is there a second?
May I ask a question?
Mr. Mayor?
Marina, if there's not a second, does the application fail because of failure to act on part of the board's part? Is the application declined or is there a no because the board chose not to move on the application?
I would recommend that the motion be changed or amended to deny the application if no one's willing to second. Or someone can make a second. You don't have to vote in favor of the motion necessarily.
Second question, if the application fails, isn't there still a violation of 3.34 because the present 38.34 has not been approved?
There is so there would be a violation outstanding for the existing improved lot coverage that's over the 35%.
And does this body need to take some action in that regard?
With respect to
Well, if I could chime in, Mayor, let's say hypothetically, if the board were to deny this application, the terms of this condition whereby, the applicant or developer didn't have to rip up the patio immediately was that we gave them an opportunity to apply to the board. If they don't get the approval, the property has to be restored to within the borough code limitations.
Okay. And Marina, what you're recommending is?
Mr. Chairman, just if I may, I know it's unusual. If the board does not see fit to approve the pool, my client would appreciate approval of the existing patio and just leave things the way they are.
Okay, let's hold on to that thought, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Mayor, I think you had one other question.
Yeah, so either there would be a second to Mr. Merman's and then there would be a vote up or down. Or would it be that there is not a second, in which case then there would be a second, there would be a new motion to deny the application? Is that what you're saying, Marina?
I've never been in this situation before.
Can I weigh
So-
in from my experience?
Okay,
We've had an application similar where we ran into this issue. And we were advised, I believe, either by Nylema or it might have been my Nylema, but we were advised to go ahead with the motion and a second and take the vote. And if the vote is yes, the motion is approved. If the vote is no, it's turned down. There really isn't a need to make a motion to deny. It's really, you make your motion as it's been made, we second it, and then we take the vote. This happened about, I'm gonna say 4 years ago on an application. So, and I remember it distinctively, and it was the same issue that we're dealing with now.
Mr. Chairman,
Hey, I'm Mr. Pfeffer, 1 second. Councilman, you had a question?
Yeah, if there is no second, wouldn't we then entertain alternative motions before coming to this impasse? And then the alternative motion might be just to approve the current makeup of the property as is, so that she's no longer in trouble with the 38.5%.
That's
Yep,
an
so-
alternative. Yeah.
that's an alternative that yeah.
So if nobody feels comfortable seconding, perhaps.
I
that's
was
the
going to
direction.
second.
Oh.
I was going to second the motion.
All right, it's a moot point.
Okay, so, all
I
right.
was trying to get in there, but
So again, just to give you a little history of what the board faced back in at that application. It was exactly the same thing, and we were instructed that we had to second the motion. And then we could vote accordingly. So we already have a second, so that's moot here. But in the future, that was what was brought up, and maybe Marina can research a little more, but this was a specific exact issue we're dealing with now. There were some board members that wanted to say yes, there was someone say no. And at the end, it was, we had to wait about 5 minutes for a second before we got it, but we were instructed that we had to.
Yeah,
So,
so if there were no second, the motion would fail. But in this case, Mr. Pfeffer, who is seated to vote tonight as the first alternate, has made a second for the motion. So I will take the roll. if
Right,
that's
before you do that,
okay.
why don't we, since we've had several questions for the last few minutes, if you wouldn't mind, could you just, for the record, reread the motion that's
Okay.
been made by Mr. Merman and seconded by Mr. Pfeffer?
Okay. So the motion is for the board to grant the variance for 39.9% maximum improved lot coverage based on the revised plans submitted by the applicant, including a curtain and pop-up drain. The overflow will be removed and corrected drawings will be submitted. If drainage problems persist, the applicant agrees to a borough engineer review and recommendations, including, if necessary, municipal connection.
Okay. Thank you. Would you proceed with the roll call?
Okay. Mr. Mayor,
No.
Mr. Caslin,
Yes,
Ms. Boland,
you're muted, Ms. Boland.
Yes, I'm voting yes, and because of the fact that there's actually a pool being proposed.
Mr. Merman,
Yes,
Mr. Cray,
No.
Mr. Arkelian,
I'm gonna vote yes. I'm voting yes.
okay. Councilman Kinigo,
Yes.
Mr. Gibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Pfeffer,
yes.
Mr. Esposito.
yes.
All right, the motion passes.
On behalf of my client, I'd like to thank the board for their consideration. I'd also like to personally wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and hopefully someday we'll be able to actually all be in the same room together.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Okay.
Good night, Tom. Happy holidays.
Take care,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Have a good evening.
Farewell all.
Take care. All right, at this time, we have we have nothing left on the agenda this evening, unless anybody has anything comment-wise. This was a hard one this evening. I appreciate everybody hanging in there. Certainly not some challenging questions, some thoughtful questions, and clearly this was not something that was an easy yes or no, and took a lot of thought. So appreciate everybody hanging in there and coming up with a resolution. Any further comments from the board this time?
Happy holidays, everyone.
Merry Christmas,
Happy
happy
Christmas.
holidays,
Holidays.
and
Merry
healthy.
Christmas, everybody.
I
Happy
ditto that
New
to
Year,
everybody.
everyone. On that note, I will take a motion to close the meeting.
I'll
So
take
What
it.
moved.
about it?
Bye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
Any opposed, any abstain?
Good night,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Good night.
You're
Stay
adjourned.
healthy.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Right.
Night.